we really want to come to some.
Okay, so we're good. We're recording.
Well, excellent. Well, we're here again. This is the daily routine, which is really pretty amazing because every day is different. We know that. And here we are today with Rick Knerke, who is the author of a very good book that I enjoyed personally because it's about time equity and time credits and the way that we can value each other for 1 hour or 1 minute or 1 second. But let Rick talk about that. I don't want to go into too much, but for everyone listening, and also just to reemphasize, these 1 hour shows are meant for individuals like Rick and Signa to like an infomercial in many ways. And we usually ask, what are the three wishes that you have like right now, like today? If you haven't thought of those three wishes, Rick and Signa, I'm sure it's easy for you both because I've now this is like the ninth time that we've actually met with each other. Each time we recorded, so we do have a great history together. So I'm not going to go into too much more. Sean, I just would like to introduce Rick and let Rick go ahead. This is your stage, and I'll be here to help any way you want, Rick, to help support you. And at the end, maybe I have a couple of questions, but I know a lot's going on with you. So go ahead. It's all yours.
Well, thanks, David. Much appreciate that. I don't know if Signa's going to come and join us. I'll see where she's at. You want to come in? You want to come in? Okay. The sidekick. And Sean, since this is your show, if you don't mind, I mean, I can talk for hours. I'm sure you're going to find that out. But what is there anything specifically that you'd like to have in the context of an agenda?
Not necessarily. I mean, the whole goal of this is kind of give you the platform to kind of, talk about your message and what's current with you and what you feel is probably the most, prevalent subject matter to talk about right now on beautiful February 26th, 2025, as we're starting to move into spring. So, and Rick, I just have to say, being a Minnesota guy originally, I've spent and done many winters, and I've actually spent a lot of time in Toronto, which is a beautiful city. So I'm in Virginia now, which is kind of in the middle. It's considered the South, and everything here is much milder, but
Mhm.
that's a beautiful area that you're in up there in Ontario and Toronto.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Sean. We love it. I'm one of those lucky people who was born and raised in Toronto. So I've got my entire life here, and I've watched the city grow and change. And despite the traffic and other things, it's still a great place to be. So, for sure. Um, I first have to say, I was so blown away the other day. I took some time to look at a couple of your other interviews and different things that you did, and I got to tell you, I was so blown away by oh geez, come
The
on,
pyramid
Signa.
guy.
Huh?
The pyramid guy.
Yeah.
Red Bell or yeah,
Potter.
Rob Potter.
Potter, yes.
Ron Potter, was it?
Rob Potter.
Rob Potter. Man, I'll tell you, I, I would absolutely love to have like an hour with him just to tap into his brain. It's he's got a lot going on there, but it was really nice and just wanted to let you know that I think you're doing a great job the way that you're dealing with people. And it was a tremendous interview. Good luck. I hope you have thousands of those kind of things going on
Yeah,
with
and
you.
you know what? It's people like yourself that makes it interesting. I'm like a little kid in a candy store, so I get to sit and listen, and I'm like fascinated by all this new information, and and then I get to kind of like be that person that says, okay, I want to know more, and what about this, and but it's a lot of fun, and I feel like there's a lot of momentum and a lot of synergy with what we're trying to do. So it's really nice to be able to uh, give accolades to the people that are out there making the world a better place. And that's really the whole goal of this platform.
Yeah, and that came through really clear for me, Sean. So congratulations, like I said, and don't hesitate. You know, if we can help with a different show or give a different perspective or answer a question or two, because I keep finding that the more uh, questions that I answer opens the door for a whole bunch of new questions that I never even contemplated. So it's very interesting how this is all unfolding for me. The book's been out for 4 years, just over 4 years. Um, and I have to honestly say, I'm disappointed at the distribution because nobody really wants to push my book. In fact, I'm what do you call it?
Shadow
I'm
banned.
shadow banned, and LinkedIn doesn't allow me to do stuff, and it's kind of, you know, it's kind of a bad scenario for them because they need data to make themselves valuable, and you know, here they are tossing away all this unconventional material that they could add to their data bank and utilize. But I don't worry about it. It's their loss, and all I can say is I'm happy to be here and talk to you about time equity and how it came about. And if you have questions, you know, like, don't get me wrong, jump right in there and we'll
100%.
tackle it all, right?
100%.
So in 1981, I got the lucky break to start in the investment business after being a mechanic for 7 years. I did a 7,750 hour automotive apprenticeship. And I think that's where I got my grounding skills to work with people. To show integrity in a garage is a very challenging place because, you know, customers want their cars done at the cheapest possible price, and you know, they're always going to go out and try and undercut you. But there's a skill involved in building relationships in a business like that, just like any small business. And it was a really, really great place to be, to learn how to talk to people, how to sell people, how to recognize, you know, certain personality types and things like that. So that's been all brilliant in the whole thing. So starting in the investment business in 1981, I went to work for a large company, one of Canada's bigger financial institutions. And I thought it was so fortunate that I got in there because I was a high school dropout. I had the 7,750 hour apprenticeship in motor vehicle mechanic, but it didn't give me any of the other things that you would get at post-secondary education. So this gentleman, when I walked into those offices, told me I was one of the luckiest guys that he ever has met in the world. And I was blown away by the statement. And I said, well, why? Why do you think I'm so lucky? And he goes, Richard, you're here on the cusp of a new and an unfolding 20-year cycle in financial asset appreciation. And I said, yeah. He says, yeah. And he says, and the best part is 20 years from now, there's a secondary part, 20 years of hard assets like gold, oil, gas, and real estate. And I thought, well, that sounds simple enough. And sure enough, to this guy's word, and I really wish I could remember his name, but he called the shot exactly perfectly. So when I joined the investment business in 1981, assets in the entire country and managed money were less than $3 billion. And it was startling because this fellow's prediction about how the next 20 years with the baby boom generation was going to amplify those assets under administration and create huge assets that create huge revenues for, you know, the industry and other areas. And I was so blown away, but watched intently. In Canada in 1981, we had Canada savings bonds that were paying 19.5% interest. We had GICs that were being that were paying out 20%, and they were locking them up for 10 years at 20%. So those were some really, really challenging times to get into the business of, if you will, fluctuating equities, because who cared if you made 20%? As long as you're making that money without any risk, everybody absolutely loved it. So it created a really interesting observation on my part to watch all of this stuff happen. And I thought, well, that's great. So, you know, I'll get in and I'll try and do the buy low, sell high thing while the markets are down in 1981. and I did okay. And I talked to people about the buying low, selling high, and the reality that most people buy high to sell low. And I thought it can't be that difficult to help clients understand when these two occasions are occurring. And most of the time, they're barking. You know, if you're driving home and there's a stock market crash, every news radio station on the is playing stock market crash, and they're getting people's anxieties and fears up. And yet, I taught my clients that when they hear that kind of news, that they were going to get right into the entire buy low, sell high thing.
Yeah.
So I was very grateful to get into a company that offered like a training program and helped me learn how to make telephone calls and solicit and prospect and do all of these business related things that I never really had to concern myself with because my customers in the garage came to me. So that's the way I was used to doing business. Anyway, I started to fall in love with the entire idea of financial planning and helping people achieve their financial goals. And the next thing you know, it's 1987, and we have a major stock market crash. And I was flabbergasted, largely due to the fact that we couldn't have a scenario really whereby people understood what was going on. And for me, it was my first market crash. So it was really interesting to see how theory and how actions were so disconnected. And that really bothered me because I thought the financial institutions need to really address these issues of risk. But at that time, I was new in the business and I was excited about the future possibilities. So I just stayed on and kept my mouth shut until I found out very shortly thereafter. I started about 18 months later, 16 months later, I ran into a colleague and they introduced me to a small company called Versatile Financial Group. And what made them different was really interesting because unlike the big institutions that really don't care what they have to do to get a client, on the independent side, these people were looking to build long-term relationships with an advisor that they could trust that would be there. Unlike the bank, when you walk into the bank and you haven't been there for a year, there's always new people and you've got to re-explain yourself and who you are and da 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 da. Whereas we had a vested interest in the client's success over that long-term horizon. So that became the focal point. Thinking about the future, thinking about where things are going to go, where things are going to happen. And of course, while you're planning, life takes anyway, life gets going, right? Like while you're planning the life is happening.
Right.
I enjoyed that very much. So anyway, as I got into the business and in the springtime of 1988, I was doing a trade show in Toronto about the financial industry coming off the cuff of this stock market crash in 1987. And as I was standing manning this booth for a company called Trimark, and all of a sudden I hear this booming, "Hey, Rick." And I turn around and there's one of my colleagues from the industry, a fellow by the name of Michael Lee Chin, who is a Canadian legend because he came from Jamaica as a student for engineering and decided that while he was in engineering, he had to pay for rent and things like that. So he became a life insurance sales guy. And when he graduated from the school and got his ring and got his first job, he didn't want to take it because his career in selling insurance to doctors was paying him 3 times what his engineering degree was going to pay him. So obviously at that time for him, it was the money that was most important, and he decided that he was going to go and do that. So he sees me and he goes, "Rick, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Mike, I'm doing probably the same thing that you are." And he goes, "What's that?" And I go, "Looking for my next client, my next opportunity to sell, pay my rent, pay my car payment, And I said, "What are you doing here?" He goes, "Oh, I'm not doing that." And I started to laugh and I go, "Oh, okay. So what is it that you are doing?" And then he looked at me in the eye and he said, "Richard, let me ask you a question first. I said, sure, that's great. Ask away, Mike. And he looked at me and he said, how are you going to differentiate yourself from 3,500 licensed financial advisors in the city of Toronto? In other words, why should I do business with you? And it was like being hit out of the baseball diamond, okay, with a big bat. And it really stopped me. And yet I turned around and I was laughing. And Mike looked at me and he said, Rick, this is the most serious question I ask people. How can you be laughing at this? I said, Mike, if I knew how to differentiate myself, I'd be out there doing it. And he burst out laughing and said, that's the best comment that I've ever heard. And we sat down and he very succinctly told me one thing. He said, Richard, 97% of the people in our industry are buying milk. We're going to teach you how to sell your clients the cows. And that day, the light went on for me. And I understood the difference between a product, if you will, a financial product that was being sold to the market. But then I recognized, wait a minute, it's the guys who are managing this money that are making all the money and they're making all the rules. So I joined his company it was a wonderful invitation. I didn't know any better at the time, but he was a $9.5 million management company. And of course, we know that $9 million is a ridiculously small amount of money for a management company. But it wasn't that was bothersome. It was that Mike was challenging the conventional questions and the issues, but addressing them in a much better and succinct way. So the first thing I learned was, the elevator speech. when somebody says, what do you do for a living? And I said, I demystify the financial process so my clients can make better financial decisions. That became my slogan. And I used that and I worked with groups of people and I had an amazing time. And as we were building the company, we went from 9 million to $13 billion in the course of about 13 years.
Wow.
I was so blown away. And I was so confused because every day there was an article about the AIC group and Berkshire Group. It was named after, of course, our hero, Warren Buffett. And we, adhere to a lot of the principles that Buffett has taught investing people for, decades at this point. I don't know if you've seen share price of Berkshire Hathaway Class A shares yesterday broke out of the $715,000 mark and hit $750,000 per share.
Wow.
And in 1988, when I got working with Mike, who introduced me to Warren Buffett, one share cost $8,800 approximately in the spring of 1988. So if that doesn't prove buy and hold is an outstanding philosophy and principle, I don't know what is. But the other part, what we were taught was to, i.e., subscribe to government-sponsored programs. So in the United States, you guys have an IRA. We have an RRSP, Registered Retirement Savings Plan. And we have government-sponsored plans that help us, if you will, accumulate money so that the government is not forced to pay out all the money it's gonna in the form of pensions. So all of a sudden, the whole game really shifted. And I was really excited, but kept questioning, where is all this new money coming from? We went from, like I said, it took us almost 13 years to go from the 9 million to the first billion. And then it just was like a hockey stick. It took off. And I couldn't understand what it was. And I was looking for all these secrets to see if I could find something that was tangible. Well, we decided to take my family to go down to Florida. I'd never been to Disneyland. And I figured it was a good time as any to go down there and have a relaxing time with my family and just allow myself to clear my head. And I did. And I was standing on the balcony at the condo at Disney World. And I had an idea at 4 o'clock in the morning. And it was going to be, Richard, go back and retire, get out of the business, sell your business, like say goodbye. So I went back, and the premise of that thought was based on what I saw was happening, and all this new money was coming in to the company, and I couldn't quite understand it until after I cleared my mind in Florida, and I realized what was going on, and it was shocking at one particular level to see and to hear these guys bringing all this money. They must have been telling their clients, look at this investment. It's done 15% per year for the last 15 years. And in our business, and I'm sure that you're aware of this, inside your prospectus or the thing that you give to your client that discloses all the information on an investment that you're buying, we know one very important thing, that past performance is no indicator of future results. And yet at the same time, I watched this hockey stick materialize, and I thought, man, this guy has a great upside strategy, but he's got nothing to protect on the downside when the shit hits the fan. And guess what happened? I decided to resign after all of this, after 24 years in the business, and after spending 15 years with Mike. I walked into his office and I said, with all due respect, it's time for me to part ways. And he's like, well, why? And I said, because I really honestly don't think that you're prepared for the downside. And I think based on how I'm observing all of this new money coming in, it's got to be sold based on past performance. And that could be very dangerous. Well, guess what happened? 2008 financial crisis. I left the business. I retired. I sold my book of my clients, my assets under admin, for a mechanic. I did not bad over my 24-year career. I ended up managing just over $40 million for 127 families. And I thought that was pretty decent, given my background and no university education. But I started to really think after all of that about, where do I go from here? So I gave myself a few years off. I got back to being a dad, got back to doing more things with my kids before they were going to be off to university, and spend more time with them and do some other stuff. So I was really grateful for that breather. And I took 5 years off, and it was wonderful. I reclaimed my health and, a whole bunch of different things, and decided that it was, potentially speaking, it was a time for this change. So one Saturday morning, I'm sitting back and I'm enjoying an espresso, reading the business section of the Globe and Mail, Toronto's newspaper. And I'm looking at the Globe and Mail business section, and it says, wanted, new world financial order. And I thought, whoa, this is going to be an interesting article to read while I'm having my coffee. And I read about Sarkozy and Merkel walking in France, discussing at a G20 meeting what was going on in the financial world. And both of them concluded in this article that the financial system was completely broken. And there was no way that they were going to be able to repair, based on things like the huge interest rates and the amount of the debt in Canada, the United States, the rest of the world that was using this system that really was creating more problems at one level than it was worth. And as I was sitting there reading this article and having, all my thoughts responding to this article, I had this awakening that said, Richard, I'm going to help you write a book, and we're going to switch the world from a money system to a time-based system. And at that morning, Saturday, October 18th, 2008, I sat there and I wondered, how am I ever going to implement and introduce a time-based system to replace capitalism when I don't know shit about either of them? I knew nothing about time. And despite the 24 years I had in my business, before I left the business, I had all these questions about the levels of integrity that people were doing and how could we create a better response to financial literacy so people could really wake up and go, hey, wait a minute, this is the truth that we need to listen to. This is the truth that we need to get to. And yet, all of the financial institutions have different definitions of financial risk. So some of the questions are the most absurd, and some of them are maybe realistic, but I don't think the clients understand sometimes the questions that are being posed to them in the discussions to make sure that they're buying the right kind of investments. Anyway, it was a tremendous amount of fun, and I absolutely loved it. And I thought, now's the time that I'm going to start writing this book. And of course, never having really any experience in writing a book, I wrote one day and then put it away, and then life took over, and I did this and I did that. So it actually ended up taking me almost 10 years to actually write the book.
Wow.
And it was incredible because my lovely partner beside me, Signa, we met at a TV studio doing what we're doing right now, kind of an interview to Signa's a musician and a singer-songwriter and a band leader and a sound tech. So she was at this studio talking about her story and how she as a single artist was going across the country and playing music and doing all the things that she loved to do. And she said, and I overheard her say at this meeting when things were winding down, that it took her 2.5 hours to go by transit to get to this venue on this really beautiful but hot, sticky Friday afternoon. And I thought, oh my God, if this poor lady has to go on transit, she's going to be hours again. You know, she told me it took 2.5 hours to get from her place to the studio. And I'm like, well, I'm going west. If I can help you in any way, shape, or form, I'd be happy to do that. And she said, yes, I actually am going west. And I said, great, jump in. I'll drop you off at the most convenient location for you. And we got out into the traffic, and it was
it was about 5 o'clock, and there was really heavy traffic, and neither of us had eaten all day because we were at the studio and there was nothing nearby. So Rick said, well, are you hungry? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And we said, well, we might as well eat instead of sitting in traffic for 2 hours. So we sat down and we had a chat, and he asked me a little bit about my book. It's called The Song Creation Formula. And he said, well, I'm working on this book called The Capitalist's Worst Nightmare Come True, The Crucifixion of Capital. And I thought that was really interesting. And then a little bit later on, after he had a chance to read my book, he asked me if I would help edit his book. Because he liked how I put my book together. And he said, in exchange for you editing my book, I can teach you a little bit more about business and about the financial industry and investing. And I thought, okay, well, I can learn something from him and I can help him get his book done. So it wasn't until 2020 when the lockdowns were happening, and we were at that time, we'd become a couple and we were living together, and we were listening to the news and everything was being shut down. And Rick said, well, you know, we're stuck at home. This is the perfect time. It's a sign to get the book done. So let's spend the next 10 months or whatever it takes. We didn't really know how long it would take, but let's just focus 100% and get this book done. So we decided, I don't know if you want to tell this part or if you want me to, but because it's about the crucifixion of capital, it's not really. It's about the resurrection of humanity. So,
hey, that's my line.
I know he likes to tell this part. So he said, well, let's release it on Easter Sunday because it's the resurrection of humanity. So we decided we would release digital chapters one at a time so people could pre-sign up for the book, and they would get one chapter at a time on a private page, and we could get some feedback as we were going along. And then when each chapter is released, then we could release the paperback. So that's what we ended up doing. And I know you like to tell this part.
Which part is that?
Well, after a couple months and a few chapters were released, all of a sudden we got to chapter 6, and Rick was like, I don't know where to go from here. And he ended up rewriting the chapter 2 or 3 times. And a friend connected us with somebody else who mentioned the law of time. So we started Googling and researching the law of time. And we had pages and pages of research. And we learned about the 13-month calendar and how it's more harmonious for humanity because it's 13 months and 28 days. So the first of the month is always on the same day, and holidays are the same date each year. So it makes it a lot easier to track stuff as well. And in a financial system, since we're still there, it makes it easier to track finances. So we had
Actually, it was more confusing.
Yeah. No, I mean the 28-day calendar.
Yeah, it was more confusing.
So Eastman Kodak used to use the 13-month 28-day calendar in order to track the finances of the company, and
it was the hidden secret with accountants, because the 28-day calendar, the 13-month 28-day calendar, as Signa was trying to explain, it's more running on a vertical, and that vertical aligns the dates so that there's less confusion in the system. So for example, if you get paid on the first of the month, that first of the month could be a Monday, a Tuesday, a Friday, whatever day. But it allowed for the banks to take advantage of the people by charging excess interest over the course of times like weekends and things of that nature. So it allowed for people from an accounting perspective to make more accurate financial statements because everything lined up on the same day. So the 28-day system, 7 times 4 weeks, 28 days, and it smooths out and becomes a natural part of, if you will, the 13-month calendar that was based upon a woman's menstrual cycle, which was our global cycle way back when, before, time was considered anything else. It was a menstrual time, okay, that aligned the calendars and the stars and all the other things at that time frame. And as we continued to dwell into the whole understanding of time and the people who were trying to take advantage, and we learned about the government, like the United States in 1772, I think it was, or 1775, they actually removed 14 days out of the calendar. And when we started getting into these details, we started finding out just a whole bunch of stuff, which I'm going to share a little bit with you to talk about the aspects of time and how that can be included in the context of where we're going. And you wanted to say something.
Well, I was just going to say there was a whole movement in the early late 20s and the early 30s.
That's
There
right.
there were 100 industries that were using the 13-month calendar for their accounting. So there was a worldwide appeal to the League of Nations to change the whole world into a 13-month calendar, and there are also a lot of other countries that use that. And they decided on January 1st, 1933, that they would change to a 13-month calendar. And then there were some special interest groups that were against it, and they kiboshed the whole thing, and so we still have the confusing calendar that changes every year.
So having that sort of brought to this point, as we were starting to go through the aspects of time, we heard names like Jose Aguilares. I'm not sure if I've ever pronounced that name correctly, but there were all sorts of people that were actually getting together, and they were talking about how we can change and utilize time to our benefit, to give people more time, a little bit more freedom in the alignment, because we got lost. Everything that we see in front of us is an illusion. Everything we look at behind us is an illusion. We create that. So the question started to come up as to, hey, if we can have this financial system as an illusion, why can't we create an alternative? And that alternative will become the future illusion, the vision that we're all seeking going into. And I really, at that level, because we've actually, as we were putting all this time stuff together, it became more clear that not only was time more, if you will, valuable, okay, than money, we started going deeper into the psyche of people in discussion, and we had discussion groups and forums and stuff, and we talked about what's your major fears in life, and people fear change. No matter if it's better suited for the people, they're still reluctant to change. And that brought another interesting perspective, because Cigna found out that in any population where you can gather 3.5% of the people, that 3.5% is enough to create change for the other, 90, 96 or whatever percent. And it was mind blowing to think that based on these, let's just say, small situations, that you could get such substantial results. So that was all, very interesting. And we started to look at, wait a minute, time equity could really and truly create a way that would solve a lot of the problems that we're experiencing. So I'll just want to talk on one sort of problem and issue that's rampant in many industries. But we have something called planned obsolescence. And that planned obsolescence mean, and I'm just going to use a stove, okay, as an example. So I don't know what a stove is worth today, but let's just assume for argument's sake, a new stove at one of the big box stores is, let's say, $400. But that stove is only designed to work and be efficient for 5 years. But in the meantime, you got a guy on the assembly line who has to build those stoves, and he doesn't have time to make sure that every little part of it is done perfectly, because it's on an assembly line, which keeps him moving or her moving to this rhythm of the assembly line to try and get jobs done. And in some cases, these, if you will, planned obsolescences, they even take place after 3 years. Sometimes stuff breaks down even within the first year. But the point is that people had to rush. They had to do their 8 hours, and let's assume it took 8 hours to build 2 stoves, with a lack of pride. Well, I grew up, and Sean, you're probably a fair bit younger than me, but I don't know if you might remember stickers on manufactured products that it said proudly made in the US of A, or proud to be Canadian on stuff that manufacturing companies. You remember those days?
Okay? Absolutely.
People had, a vested interest in the success of the business, but businesses continued to get greedy. Okay. So my thought was, well, wait a minute. We can actually do a whole bunch of really wonderful things if we can build a stove that will last twice as long. So instead of the stove lasting for 5 years, build it so it lasts 10. And then the person who's on the assembly line, let them do that in a 5-year time frame, like a 5 hour per day or a 4 hour per day time frame. So effectively, you're building one great stove that lasts twice as long, but you've also given your employees or the world who work under the 40-hour restricting that we can actually take off at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and go and do soccer for kids, or music lessons for kids, or helping elderly people, or helping war vets. I mean, it's a shame that the global budget for the defense machine is over, I think it's $2.4 trillion. And where's the money for the vets who gave their lives unselfishly, okay, to, protect our rights? And here we are, especially over this last decade, making a bloody mess of the whole affair. And people are scared, and they're pissed off, and they're upset. And all of a sudden, bang, we get COVID and all of the implications of that, and the fear that created. And literally, okay, we're not even out of the mess from the perspective of who is telling the truth. So anyway, we'll go jump back to the book for a quick second, but we started deciding that, okay, we're getting close now with this time business, and we're going to put that into a question that says, well, wait a minute. What's more important in life, especially at the end of your life? Is it the amount of money that you've got in your bank? Is it the home that you have, that you live in by yourself, that you have 4 cars to drive and nobody's there with you? And you start taking a look at some level the unreasonableness of these things that we call success. And the success that we believe is success is outward success. It's the material things that they keep dangling in front of us that keep us going, oh, I gotta have that. And that's, we go from the stove now, jump into iPhones. How many iPhones have we already had since the creation of iPhones? And how many more will be necessary to maintain the profitability for Apple to continue to make those reformed or new phones? And are they really making our lives that much better going from 3G to 5G? But it doesn't matter, because the people are so ingrained in this product vend approach. But going back to time, there's a couple of things that I came up with, which again, when you start to focus and concentrate on something, and Sean, again, just going back to your interviews, I see the way that you think and converse with people. And I think that we need to have better levels of understanding the words that we're using. So I actually broke down time and suggested that the T stood for truth, and that the I stood for inspired, and the M stood for meaningful, and the E for experience. So time is a truth-inspired, meaningful experience. And then I thought, wow, I love that. And then I turned it backwards and I said, well, what does time do? Time reversed emits, right? Emit, E-M-I-T. And emit, okay, as an acronym, is equality. Excuse me. M for motivated, I for inclusive, and T for togetherness. So we actually have emit, meaning equality, motivated, inclusive, togetherness. So when we put them both together, we have a truth-inspired, meaningful experience, equality, motivated, inclusive, togetherness. And that to me sounded like a wonderful foundation for us to go ahead. Well, most of us don't know what the problems are because of capitalism because we don't want to downplay our so-called advanced species. We want to think that we're doing the right thing. And that's why it's so difficult for people to lift the veil off their faces, because they don't know what's going on. The monetary system proves it. There's no transparency. The other healthcare systems and other things, they're not even telling you what they're putting in food anymore. Every day I turn around and it's all over the place, all over the place as to what are people trying to get out of this life. And then I started going one step further and going, oh my God, crime. Okay. Sorry. Capitalism is the most significant cause of crime, corruption, greed, genocide, manipulation, poverty, and war. And in fact, there's a book out there, it's called Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. And what that book does is it tells you that the way that we eliminate debt is eliminated, okay, through
war and genocide.
War and genocide.
So they plan it this way so they can reduce the debt, and then they build it up again with the way the financial system works.
So technically, we're creating profits to kill people. And when all of that started to come really clear for me, I started to really, truly recognize what my mission was and what the mission of time equity is. And very simply, I'll state it like this, and hopefully, Sean, I haven't, spent more of your time than you've allotted for this. I was going to say, what was I going to say?
I don't know where you were going with that right now.
So I was just going to say that I after going through like literally 40 years of uncovering all of these different things that we found out about the whole time process. Oh yeah, I know. So all of a sudden it came very clear to me that your time is not worth any more than my time. And my time is not any more worth than your time. And that, if we can get to a society that will rebuild trust, it will harbor to creating a better equality amongst humanity, and it'll be the leading steps towards a new redefined democracy. So in the case of democracy, I've just decided to run in our election tomorrow, in our provincial election, and I'm taking a stand with a group called NOTA, N-O-T-A, which is none of the above. And it services and speaks to
Direct democracy.
direct democracy. Thank you. And at the same time, we're now doing a lot more research into these different aspects of social republican socialism, looking at direct democracy and all these things. So we actually, the first thing before we can really solve any of our problems like greenhouse and sustainability and all of the problems that we have in the world right now, which I've designed into a hub of 12 spokes, and the spokes are the 12 major problems of our world. And what we need to do is we need to solve those problems for society, for humanity to continue to sustain itself. So our objective was to now, the stuff that's been unfolding, it's been 4 years since we released the book. I'm excited, but I also give away the book. And I invite everyone, and I'm inviting you as well, to grab onto my website, get a free digital copy of the book, share the link, okay, with your friends and other associates, because this has to get around. And recently I've been doing presentations. This last week I did a 3-day set with a group called the Indaba Movement, which is from Nigeria. And I did
it was Feedback from the Future.
Yeah, it's called Feedback from the Future. And before that, I did another group in June in Toronto called Get Elevated. And they're another group that's looking for ways to clean things up. And it was amazing because they sent a whole group of African and Caribbean delegates. And I spoke to these groups. And I actually, for the first time in my career, got a standing ovation because African people know they have a problem that they shouldn't have. And nobody has yet, presented anything to them to make it, if you will, clear as to what the next steps are. So that's what I'm focusing on right now, is defining those next steps and the language and the actions that need to be taken to be of support. And I'm not sure if I want to finish and write a book on that part of it, because we've been talking to, and how we met David, interestingly enough, was David met an amazing guy in, I'm not sure exactly where, probably for David Online, but he met this fellow who's a connection of mine in the UK. She's a musician, and she told us, or she told David about a book about a world with no money. And then when I heard that, I started laughing, because the guy who wrote the book
wrote the screenplay.
The screenplay. It's a screenplay for a movie. And he didn't actually identify how the world shifted from a monetary to a time-based system. So we sent him a copy of the book, and we're hoping that maybe something will happen down the road. But now we're looking at doing a documentary or doing a short film here in Toronto, and just doing it of our own accord, based on my experience of this industry and how we can truly empower people. And to Signy's introduction with regards to the book, which is called The Capitalist's Worst Nightmare Come True, The Crucifixion of Capital, this has nothing to do with crucifixion. This has everything to do with the resurrection of the human potential. Okay. And Sean, I'm sorry. I know I've run off. I know that
you're good. You're totally good. No, you're
David, it's
fine.
your fault.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Hey, you
You,
like
you,
to talk a lot too.
you didn't give Sean a chance yesterday. Anyway, if you have some questions that you'd like to have, we can go on. We booked 90 minutes, so we can still
Okay.
go on for another 25 or so minutes if you'd like.
Yeah.
We can set up another time. We can get better acquainted. We can do whatever you might want to consider. So I'll leave the rest up to you now. And
Well, I would definitely like to do another time because we're unpacking so much stuff. I don't like to put time limits on any of it, in all honesty, because it's such great information, and you've got a lifetime, a career of knowledge that deserves much more than an hour to disseminate. And so, even for myself, kind of getting this data drop that you're giving me because it's a major data drop. You're looking at the structure of how things are. You're looking at what's broken within it, and then you're looking at the solution. And it's hard sometimes for people to make that transition and get out of the box. But sometimes what you have to do is give them the vision of what it looks like outside the box to get them to want to go out of the box, right? And get them out of their comfort zone a little bit. And I find it's very interesting because simultaneously, there's a lot of things going on right now with the transition of the planet. And time is a material element, which is manipulated and like you very well documented and talked about, is used many different ways, right? Like it can be used to document and assist with financial gain. It can be done in many different ways for um, assessing age and all these different things. But for me, because I get into so much different subject matter, um, we're getting into a lot of the what I would just get into is disclosure. And there are influences that have come into this system. When you talk about debt, war, and that whole cycle, which we've been in really probably for thousands of years, right? I like this is not like new. In our era, though, we can document World War I, World War II, three, Korea, Vietnam, da 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 da. And so I feel like what you're talking about is very in sync with the future where we're going to evolve as a species and to evolve as humanity and as the planet Earth is evolving. And a lot of those traditional roles that we've grown up with and that traditional box that we've been put in, I see that that's opening up and it's coming in through cracks and layers. And there's a ray of beam of light coming here and a ray of beam light coming there, and it's coming from all directions. And you're hitting it in a very different direction with a very distinct background and a very good background in the financial system. And that is a very distinct skill set. That's a very distinct knowledge base. But it's interesting how you're turning that in and seeing how it's affecting time and how it's affecting the structure of society and what the actual part of it is that's limiting. I think it's like we're being limited, we're being put that box. But once we get out of the box and realize that these were all mechanisms of kind of holding us down, it's like, wow, I just got the handcuffs off and I didn't even know I was in handcuffs, which is the funny part, right? It's the part of like putting the mirror on it and saying, wow, you don't understand that there actually is a structure that's putting you in right now that is 100% based on putting you into this box that you don't even realize that you're in. And so now you got to take a look at that. And then there is that part of it that's processing that information and is saying, look, now that you've gotten this vision and this look, now it's time to start looking at the future and start looking at that next place that we go to. And it's really fascinating, actually. It's very, very fascinating because as a person like myself, being a small business owner, I'm thinking that this is the reality and this is the goal. And then you address that and say, okay, you've got all that. Now what? And I find it interesting because I'm very much into, I guess, past and future, but the past being, civilizations like Atlantis and, places where this whole confinement and this whole structure did not exist. And also where off-planet civilizations, which are much more advanced than us, if you look at how we are presented in sort of an evolution phase, we're kind of considered kindergartners, first graders, right? That's kind of where we're at right now. So from other civilizations, they look at us and say, "Wow, you guys, you're kind of in an infant state, but where is the future?" And it's these other civilizations where they've moved into the space that you've clearly designated and talked about. That is where it really becomes fascinating, because that's where people can talk 5D, they can talk all this different stuff, but 5D is way more than just you thinking that you're tapping into higher dimensions. It's a complete makeover of the entire infrastructure reality that we live in. And that part of it that you're addressing is a very important part. And that is a part that I think most people don't really get a look at and understand, like I was saying, that you're really actually being confined to a much very specific box of reality that's very restrictive. So really great information. I love it. And I definitely want to do another call with you. And I know that David is going to want to, probably chime in with some questions as well.
Yeah, actually, if you don't mind, I've been trying to keep a mental record of what Rick and Signa were just talking about specifically. I've had I think it's 8 conversations now with both of them, and like I said, we recorded it because it's amazing how, like Rick mentioned, how we got to know each other, and it was different, Sean, than how you and I got to know each other. And I said this to Rick. Um, when you get somebody making a referral for you, like a solid, like you need to talk with this person, like that, like type of conviction, if you don't trust, you don't listen to these things. We not the issue that I see it, both anyone listening to this, we're just not following God's guidance. Not just God, like any one religion, but God is within us. So when I say God, I mean Rick, I mean Signa, I mean Sean. And so we try to help each other, but in this world, there's so many people that are so quick to disregard you. And that is not really the golden rule or a golden ratio or golden anything. To come into a situation and be treated guilty and be forced to try to find a way to prove that your innocence, you can't do it. We could try to do it and try to, lobby and do all of the things that are necessary in government to make those changes. But to try to do it from the top down, no. Like we've already talked about, even the technology that Sean represents, this is for Rick and Signa, specifically anyone listening also. But the technology, we already come to terms. This is a zero-based technology, like off-planet or whatever you want to call it, which means you go to the center of nothing. That's where the power is. And that's where the quality is. Like when Rick was talking about manufacturing, like stoves or refrigerators or whatever, if that organization, the people working there are not in the present moment of 0 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds, okay? Now, Rick just mentioned about keeping time. Time starts at 0. And then the hologram moves so fast. You're talking about another trillion zeros before the 1, or even more now. The technology, even Rick was mentioning about the speed and processing this technology, the way that they went from, his investment firm that he mentioned, how he started out with X million and they ended up with billions. The way that happens is in finance, when the computers started to come in to the classroom and also into corporations, it was all about increasing the velocity of the transaction and reducing the turnaround time. So that investors, like that's when day traders and all these other kind of modifications of how, and also Bernie Madoff, we can't ignore Bernie. I mean, I don't even know if I don't know if Rick, do you know if Bernie's still alive? Do you know anything about that? Is he with us or
I don't know.
okay?
Yeah.
Well, I'm just mentioning that because he kind of wrote the book on how you can set up the game for you to win all the time. It's a monopoly. It's not even really a game because you got to apply mercy because the intelligence that we have is total intelligence. It's artificial and natural. This is the plus. Artificial plus natural equals total intelligence, or TI. And it's the plus and the equal that we focus our attention on. We don't have the ability to define either artificial with absoluteness, I'm talking about assurance, or natural. We can make assumptions, we could do data computation and other ways of reaching some form of critical thinking, which is the highest level of what we would think as intelligence or IQ. But it's really not IQ even. See, we were taught about it, an intellect quotient. But really, if you reverse that, like what you did with time, I thought that was fabulous. I'm going to steal that if you don't mind.
Yeah, and the acronyms for time, and then emit and back and forth. And
that was brilliant.
I love that you brought that up, David, because it reconstructs what your concept of it actually is. And it's like once you've taken the chains off of time being 9 to 5 in your box, in your cubicle, the whole thing, and then you start looking at how it really should be spent and what it really is, which is a gift and beauty. It takes the confinement like structure of it off of you. And Richard, I have to say that when you start off a conversation and say, you're banned on LinkedIn, which I had an account, 15 years, 17,000 people, they shut it down. But as soon as you say that, what I find very interesting is that all of a sudden you've got my attention. Because the people that are kind of maintaining this veil, almost like this matrix, they know what you're talking about and they understand that this information is blowing up the matrix. And like, I wouldn't consider this information necessarily threatening in any way, shape, or form, but now I really have a clear understanding of how this information breaks up the matrix and it starts opening people up to a much different reality. And like I said, you're putting the mirror on and saying, look, as much as you think you're free, you're actually very restricted and very like locked in and very controlled and manipulated. And so now after going through and getting this data drop of amazing information, now I see like they validated your work is I guess what I'm trying to say. They have validated what you're doing. And that to me is actually like phenomenal. That is really an amazing, validation. So as much as it could be frustrating, I think it's also really validating for what it is that you're doing, because clearly you're onto something. And clearly the mechanisms of society that maintain a lot of the control can see that. And they're like, oh no, we can't let this get out there. So I would say congratulations.
Thanks, Sean. I really appreciate that. And I get your sincerity in the statement because the majority of people that you and I talk to are not the conventional individuals, okay, that that are a large part, but they have no voice, they have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And that's where we need people like you and people like me who can sit down together and discuss an idea and discuss how we can move it forward. But if you look at that 3.5% rule, if we have 8 billion people, I need 273 million fans, okay, to support time equity. So now that's a completely different revelation than just the book on, hey, what's the capitalist's worst nightmare? It's that we get educated, that we get smart, that we become financially literate. And I don't know if I've sent you a book.
You sent me a link, but I actually have somebody here that's listening to the podcast, a friend who's absolutely loving it. And I just got a message from her that said, make sure you put the web address out there, get the web address from Richard. What is the web address, Richard?
I actually sent it to you in the chat.
I know, but it's, oh, well, just for anybody that's listening, because they're not going to be
Oh.
able to see the chat.
Okay, so it's richardmkernicki.com/author. And they can either put their email address in and get the book automatically, or they can send us an email, and we'll send them.
And what I'm doing right
book.
now is I'm taking that, putting it in a notepad. So anybody watching, it'll be in the description, and it'll also be in the we'll put it in the comments as well so people can get to it. And Richard, what I'd like to do is, we'll circle back after the call. I'll send you a link, and I'd like to set up another call because, like I said, this is just, we can go on with this, and we can, after we kind of process it on the next call, there'll certainly be more questions. And I do like to get feedback and questions from other people, and we are moving to a live platform. So in the future, as we do these calls, we'll be able to get live questions and information and feedback from a lot of people. So with that being said, I want to thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, and honor, and I'm looking forward to it. I also I have a couple things going on today that, it's not going to let me stay on the call much longer, but it doesn't matter because I want another full hour. So with that being said, thank you so much. David, once again, another great call. Thank you so much for your time down there in Brazil. And David, if you have one last thing you want to say, but I do not have too much more time here this morning.
Yeah, well, actually, Rick, did you want to say something before I conclude here in Cigna?
No, you go. You got the floor,
Okay.
David, because like Sean, we have an engagement that we got to get to as well. So you go ahead, and then we'll get reconnected. I get a sense very shortly.
And I would just like to say thank you to both.
Yeah, and Cigna, it's been a pleasure meeting you. And I'm very happy you joined us on the call because the interaction between you and Richard is contagious. And it's like you're sharing this journey together. And I absolutely love the story of how you met. Hey, by the way, we're stuck in traffic. I'm hungry. Let's go eat. Next thing you know, you're sharing this journey together. And I think that's really a special part of the whole story. So thank you for being a part of the call today as well.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I will say also I was privileged each time that I did speak with Rick, Cigna was there as well. So we like to always have three people. Really, that's the general rule in communication. It's the third person that's so important, and it flips around. It's not always the same person that takes that. We have behavior that animals have, and like ants, for example. So when an ant actually goes out to find the food, one ant goes, gets some food, goes back, gets the second ant to go to get more food, goes back, gets the third one. It's the third one that goes, and when the third one comes back, all of the ants follow. That's why when we have these conversations together, it's really wonderful. It's so fabulous. The time that we share is so valuable. This
Absolutely.
conversation here, you did such a wonderful job in you're always articulate. It's so amazing. I enjoy actually. I see a lot of things. You know that, Rick, in Cigna. Since I've known you, and whatever, it's probably been close to a year now or so, maybe even a little bit more. But we've had conversations that have literally been those head shakers, like what I'm doing right now. The bobblehead. It's like, which way are we going with this, bro?
We're all doing it now.
And one thing I have to say though is I love the fact that it circles back to the resurrection of humanity.
Yeah.
Right. Like when you understand that that's really what it's about, and that's the underlying message, I think that's something that everybody can share, everybody can embrace. And I think that that's really what is like, what is my part and how do I do that? And I think that in the next call that we do, I'd really like to script out the process of how that happens and what needs to happen and how each person takes a part in that and how we visualize that. Because like you said, 3.5% is a very doable number. And if we all are manifesting that vision together, we have the ability to make a lot of stuff happen. So I want to thank you again. It's been a great call. and it's been a lot of fun. And I found it very, very I mean, like there is a huge amount of information. So thank you for the career path you've chosen, the information that you've given, and I'm looking forward to our next call.
All right,
Super.
let me just say a final. Go ahead, Rick.
Just one quick thing, Sean, please reach out to me on LinkedIn and let's get connected. I don't know if we are or not. At this point,
I've just signed up for a new account, but I will get on there with you. Yes.
Yeah, because I don't really use any other social media. Like Signa, she's the techie in our relationship, and on that note, and I'm really grateful because I walk by a computer and they smoke. So, but listen, guys, this was great. David, again, timely you and I meeting in the first place, and you're right, it is about a year. Sean, great to be connected with you through David, and welcome to the connection with us. And yeah, let's get something set up, and we'll do some more conversations. I've got a lot more to share.
Looking forward to it.
All right.
All right. Take care. Have a great day, everybody.
Okay, guys, take care.
See you.